Welcome to Learn at Work, a webinar series by the journal Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation. I'm Karen Jacobs, the founding editor of Work, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm delighted to have this Learn at Work webinar, and we'll get started now. Welcome, Jonas.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Jonas Ilström, and I work as a researcher at VTI, which is the National Road and Transport Research Institute in Sweden. And VTI is a state-run research institute with the transport system as a whole as a research arena. And my main research interests is the working conditions within public transport, and especially bus drivers from a more sociological perspective mainly. So I'm here today to present a study that we did a couple of years ago, and the title of that is split shift work in relation to stress, health, and psychosocial work factors among bus drivers. And the study has been written by myself and my colleagues Göran Käcklund from the Stress Research Institute in Stockholm University, Sweden, and also Anna Anund, VTI, the National Road and Transport Research Institute here in Sweden. So, some background. Shift work is a common type of schedule within healthcare, industry, and transportation. It's widely used in other areas as well. And there has been a lot of research about shift work, and research has shown that shift work is associated with, among other things, poor health, disturbed sleep, lower working time control, etc. Within shift work, there is a type of shift that is called split shifts, which is split shifts is an increasingly common type of shift work in many businesses, and 3.3% of all workers in Sweden have this kind of working schedule, and I suppose that this number has increased during the last years. The study that showed 3.3% was done in 2012. But there is no consensus yet in the literature how to define a split shift. Normally, it's regarded as a 10-hour or more shift with one or more unpaid or less paid break within the working day. And as I said, split shift is quite common in the bus industry, and especially urban bus industry, but I think that it occurs in other bus sectors as well. And this is mainly, or the part of explanation for this is that we have different travel demands that create different demands for drivers throughout the day. And usually you can see two peaks caused by people going to and from work. So this is why split shifts, or one of the factors why split shifts are common in the urban bus industry. But currently there is a lack of studies on split shift work, and that was sort of the rationale for us to conduct this study. So we hypothesized that split shift work could be associated with some interference with social and family life, causing poorer work-life balance. And this is, of course, due to that the split shift work is very long, and you have a break in the middle, which causes you to be at work for a long time and come home late. Higher perceived stress also, and lower work time control, and that is called work strain in the literature. Also poorer sleep and higher fatigue, and lower work satisfaction. So that was kind of our hypothesis before we conducted this study. So our method was based on a questionnaire study, and we sent a questionnaire to bus drivers working 70% of full-time or more, and we sent this to urban bus drivers in Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden, I should say, working in the central Stockholm and the vicinity. And there was, this questionnaire had 35 different questions covering all sorts of aspects of working conditions as a bus driver, including some background information, background variables on the drivers. So the variables that we were specifically interested in our study in split shifts were self-rated health, perceived stress, and that was done in two different ways. We used a generic question and also like a stress index, which was derived from 4 other questions. So we had 2 stress measurements in our study, and general sleep quality and persistent fatigue, work satisfaction, and satisfaction with working hours, and also some questions about work time control and work-life balance. And the first one, work time control, was related to difficulties in influencing working hours. And the second one, work-life balance, was concerning if working hours interfered with social and family lives. Okay, some results from this study. We had 232 drivers that answered this questionnaire with a response rate of 65%, which is relatively high these days, but we send a lot of reminders and encouraged a lot of drivers to respond to this questionnaire. So we got quite high response rate. Majority of these were men working full-time, and they had an average work experience of 13 years. So of these drivers, 64% worked split shifts, and 36% of these drivers considered working split shift as a big problem for them. So 64% of the whole sample worked split shifts, and 36% of these considered this a big problem for them. So the first analysis that we did was that we split the drivers into two groups. One group was basically consisting of drivers who worked split shifts, which was 146 drivers in this study. And the other group were drivers not working split shifts. So quite a basic split between the whole bus driver samples into these two groups. And we tested those groups, and we found no significant differences between the groups in terms of gender, age, marital status, education, and working extent. However, we found a significant difference in terms of work experience, where the drivers who worked split shifts had a little bit of shorter work experience as bus drivers compared to the ones who didn't work split shift. And the difference was 12.3 years versus 15.6 years. So to conclude that the split shift drivers had shorter work experience. But otherwise, the groups did not differ between in terms of the background factors. Some results. We actually were quite surprised on the first results that we saw on this because we found no significant differences on any of the variables that we included in the analysis, which basically means that there were no differences in terms of self-rated health, stress, sleep quality, persistent fatigue, general work satisfaction with working hours, and difficulties in influencing working hours and difficulties combining working hours with social and family lives. And as I said, this kind of surprised us a bit because we had hypothesized that the split shifts would force the drivers to adopt their lifestyle in a different way compared to not working split shifts. So we were quite surprised of this finding. On the other hand, we had some indications that split shifts was not desirable, and the drivers that we spoke to, they said that for them it didn't fit at all to work. So we thought that might be something else in this. So we did another analysis of this. What we did in the second analysis was that we actually divided the split shift drivers, all of the split shift working drivers, into two different groups. One group was with drivers who did not regard working split shift as a big problem to them, which in this case was 94 drivers, and the other group was consisted of drivers who regarded working split shift as a big problem to them. So we had in the material, we had this opportunity to discriminate between the ones who thought it was a problem to them and who thought it was not a problem to them to work split shift. And on these groups, we found no significant differences at all between the background variables. So the results on the variables studied in this analysis was quite surprised, but in some sense in line what we had anticipated. We got significant differences for all the studies that we incorporated into this study. And we found that the self-rated health, stress, sleep quality, persistent fatigue, general work satisfaction with working hours, were lower in this group, were lower from the drivers who thought it was a big problem to them to work split shift. And also interesting results is that we saw some quite big differences in terms of how they rated the difficulties in influencing working hours and also in combining working hours with social and family life. So there was a big difference between the drivers who actually had the opportunity to influence, to the drivers who didn't think that there was a big problem to them, and the drivers who thought it was a big problem to them to work split shifts. So, and this was kind of in line what we had hypothesized, because working split shift can possibly influence your social and family life in a negative way. That can be hard to control for the driver, and also difficulties in influencing the working hours that they work. So our conclusions from this study was that in general, working split shifts per se did not increase stress, affect job satisfaction, work-life balance, etc., compared to not working split shifts. However, if working split shift was perceived as a big problem, it was associated with negative consequences in terms of stress, health, work time control, and other psychosocial factors. So, and the results of this study suggest that more than 1/3 of the drivers working split shifts perceived this as a big problem to them. And individual differences in how working split shifts are perceived by drivers are essential for the consequences of working such shifts. And scheduling of drivers should take individual preferences into account as far as possible, so that drivers who perceive working split shift as a problem should be avoided such shifts as much as possible. So that is our main conclusions from this study. But we have some limitations also. This study should be regarded as highly explorative. It's based on a cross-sectional design, and it's kind of hard to make casual conclusions on this. And the results, how they can be transferred to other occupations, is not very clear, although you could have an educated guess and say that probably the same mechanism would probably be relevant in other sectors as well that has split shifts. And also future studies should focus on longitudinal designs, and also in that exploration of in more of a qualitative way. So qualitative studies of how the drivers really perceive to work in a split shift environment. So that is all that I had to present today. Thank you very much for listening, and I don't know if there are some questions or so.
Yes, thank you so much. This was so interesting. Yes, I have a couple of questions. If you had unlimited funding, I love this question. What would you have as your next study? Like, what is bothering you from this study that you really want to do more? Because you shared that one of the limitations of this current study is that it's explorative. Unlimited money. What would you like to do?
I would like to do basically two things. I think I would like to make a more longitudinal study where I can follow two groups, one work split shifts and one that don't, and see how this change, how the results are going to be over time. And also, I'm very interested in doing sort of more deeper explorations from the driver's own perspective. So I want to do a lot of in-depth interviews with them and see how they describe how they perceive to work in split shifts conditions. So that's basically what I would do if I had unlimited money right now. So two studies.
Yeah. We know as researchers that doesn't happen, but keep going on. What else?
Yes, and of course we would like to see other sectors, to study this in other sectors than just among bus drivers. I mean, we have a lot of personnel that work under these conditions. So I think we should make more studies in other sectors as well, where split shifts are common.
Well, you opened up to my next question, which is, what other sectors do you think are impacted, in Sweden and maybe globally, by shift work that really needs some more exploration? What sectors do you think besides, bus drivers?
Yes. I think a lot of sectors within transportation has not a lot, but more sectors within transportation might have split shifts. For instance, personnel working on trains, etc. So more sectors in the transportation area, I think, and also healthcare is relatively common these days to have split shifts. So that I think should be explored more. And also, I was thinking one more sector, more of like service jobs that have conditions that demands people in very fragmented ways, so to speak. Usually, when it comes to when you have customers, then you need more personnel. So I think some service jobs also have split shifts. So I would like to dig into those more. But we're a transport research institute, so I suppose I would like to do this because I'm interested in this type of shift work.
So in a way, you could perhaps mentor people outside of transportation, because as you said, that's what you're working on now, because I think shift work is very important. Getting back to transportation, and I don't know if this is something that you've thought about, in the United States, we're looking quite a bit at intelligent transportation, smart cities, intelligent transportation. Do you think having more intelligent vehicles might have a negative or positive impact on shift workers?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think that your question concerned automation and the digitalization of transport system. I just want to confirm. Was it the question you asked?
Yes.
Yes. So I basically think that in in the future there will be less personnel working in the transport system, because in that future probably more and more jobs are going to be taken over by artificial intelligence and automated systems. So in that sense, I think we're going to have less people working in transportation sector, but how that influences split shift work is really hard actually to guess right now. I think it can go both ways actually, and yeah, so I'm not. I have a hard time guessing this actually. I think it can go in both directions there, but so we'll have to wait and see. But the clear is that if automation and digitalization will happen, we will have probably we will have less people working in this sector. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so curious about it because it's something that we're grappling with in the United States on many, many different levels. I hadn't thought about it related to shift work until your presentation, that, you know, we don't know what impact it's going to have. And so I think, you know, pondering it for the future and keeping it in mind will be something really interesting.
Yes.
So I have another question, which is one of my favorites too, is if, you know, a reporter got hold of your study and wanted to have a headline, what would be the most significant finding regarding shift work that could be a heading, say, in a newspaper article?
It will be something like split shift work, potentially a split shift work, potential negative consequences to anticipate, or something like that. So our main finding here was basically that split shift work does not necessarily need to be something bad if you can combine this type of work so that it fits with the individual sort of life pattern. But if you have a split shift work which don't fit very well into the life of the individual, then this will generate probably more stress and lower health and more difficulties with the social and family life. So that would be my headline. I think that split shifts, possible negative consequences foreseen, or something like that. I don't know what I said before, but
No, that makes
something towards that direction. Yes.
So that makes sense. So now this is going to be a little bit more challenging. I'm an occupational therapist as well as a board certified ergonomist. So I always put on each of those hats, and we've been looking at it, you know, maybe from an ergonomic perspective, but let's look at it from a maybe a health and rehabilitation approach. People need to have these jobs. They don't have a choice. What could the person do to better prepare themselves for having a job that is shift work? What would you recommend that they do? Because it sounds like they can't change the, you know, the time that they're working. But you know, what could they do to better prepare themselves?
I think it's a very good question, and it all comes back to what power this individual has over their life situation, more or less, I think. I think for some people it's going to be very difficult to adjust to this. If you, for instance, if you have like a social life with kids, etc., that demands certain things out of you, then it's going to be quite hard. But then you have to, of course, find solutions for that. So that is the first one. Yeah. So if you have power over your overall life condition, then I suppose you could rearrange the day a bit and make sure that you get a lot of sleep and that you use the time between the shifts in a meaningful way. That you, for instance, if you exercise or you sleep or you do something you do something meaningful that is meaningful for you on that time. So that could be a possibility, but I think it all comes back to what power the individual has over sort of external factors in their lives.
Great. Thank you. And I think those are all really important strategies that a person can implement in their own life. We know that, balance, exercise in our lives is so important, and finding work-life balance is crucial.
Yes.
We're going to conclude in a moment. Any last thoughts for people listening to your webinar and getting a sense of, what work you've been doing?
I think there is none.
So your last thoughts are really the importance of understanding people who have shift work and in split shift work, and in some cases there's things that we can do if we're in that job to make our life healthier.
Yes, and I think it comes also back to the people who arranged the schedules, and I think that they could probably do a better job in sort of researching how the drivers would like to work and how they have their lives. So I think that for some people, this type of shift work can actually fit. So I think the most important thing is to get like a match between having the people who would like or can accept to work the split shifts to get them to work those shifts. And on the other hand, those who have difficulties in rearranging their lives for different reasons, that they could be avoided to be scheduled on those shifts as far as possible.
I like that addition that you just shared about the administrative control. Because we've got engineering controls and work practice controls that the individual can do on their own. But, bringing in the administrator who's making the decisions on, how long somebody is on a shift and their schedule is so important. Jonas, I want to just thank you for this very informative and so interesting presentation. Shift work has been something of an interest for me, and I hope someday we'll have a special issue of work or a special section of work devoted to split shift work. because I think it's important, and I'd love to see it in the other sectors that you spoke about, because it's really a global issue. So thank you for listening to Learn at Work. We hope you'll subscribe to these free webinars. And Jonas, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.